When I was in middle school, my parents let me walk home from school because we lived really close by. They would of course give me a ride if it was raining or freezing out, but for the majority of the year, I would follow the same short path home each day without incident. One fall day, I was walking out of school and passing the rows of buses waiting to pick up kids. Then I passed the carpool line with parents waiting for the kids to come out to the car. Most kids either walked to school or rode the bus, so the carpool line was always pretty short. In fact, I knew which cars belonged to which families and would always wave to the parents as I walked by. It was a small town, and everyone tended to know everyone else. That day, I remember seeing a car I didn't recognize in the carpool line. It was black with windows that were so tinted I couldn't tell who was driving. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. I shrugged it off, assuming maybe it was just a family member from out of town that was picking someone up. I continued walking and eventually made it off school property and onto the paved path that led to my neighborhood. There weren't many cars around that day and things were pretty quiet. I looked ahead and noticed that there was a black car parked a short distance ahead of me, right along the path. It looked a lot like the car I had seen in the carpool line, but I couldn't be sure. I remember thinking it was weird because it would be blocking traffic if a car came down the street. For some reason, I felt a little bit uncomfortable and even considered crossing to the other side of the street. But the path I was on was the most efficient, and I wanted to get home as fast as possible. When I approached the car, I looked straight ahead and pretended not to notice it, quickening my pace. But just as I was passing the vehicle, I could hear the window roll down and a man's voice call out to me. I turned to look and it was an older man who I didn't recognize. He had a black hat on and a black trench coat. Something about him made me feel even more uneasy. He told me that his name was Phil and that something had happened to my dad. He said that my mom had asked him to go pick me up from school and take me to the hospital, and that's why he was waiting in the carpool line. I immediately knew that something was off. If anything had happened to my dad, I knew my mom would never send someone I had never met to pick me up. I had plenty of other family members that they would call first. I told the man that I thought he had the wrong person and began to walk away, but he persisted, telling me that he was sure I was the girl he was looking for. At this point, I was really creeped out, so I just began to walk away, heading towards my house at a quick pace. I heard a door open behind me and looked back to see that the man was running after me. I began sprinting as fast as I could towards my house, but the man was catching up quickly and I needed to throw him off. There was a wooded area leading up to my house and I decided to run through it in hopes that the trees would hide me. When I reached my house, I looked around but saw no sight of the man. I went inside, locking the doors behind me. I told my parents about him and they filed a police report, but it has been years now, and they never found him. When I got my driver's license and my first car, I would always get gas at a gas station just across the street from my neighborhood. One day after school, I got in my car and noticed that I was nearly empty and I would have to make a stop for gas on my way home. I drove to the same gas station that I always used and pulled up to the pump. I then took the key out of the ignition and got out of the car. As the machine prompted me to do, I inserted my card and typed in my PIN number as usual. A few seconds went by before a message popped up on the screen that said my card had been denied. I was annoyed because I knew that my card definitely had money on it and was completely valid. I started the whole process over once more, and yet again I got a message saying that my card has been denied. I was definitely irritated. Now I was going to have to lock my car and go into the gas station to pay with cash. I knew I'd be waiting in a long line and it would take even longer for me to get home, but I knew I'd run out of gas if I didn't go in. I walked into the gas station after seeing how many people were in line, decided to walk around the store a bit in hopes of it later quieting down. I strolled through the aisles and ended up picking up some bottled lemonade. I was in the snack aisle trying to decide whether I wanted a bag of candy or some chips when I heard a low whistle. I turned to see it was from an older man standing close by me. He wore tattered clothing and a cowboy hat. The man looked me up and down before complimenting me on my dress and my appearance. I was taken aback by the compliment I hadn't been looking for and felt uncomfortable about the way the man's eyes were staring at my body. I was only a teenager at the time and suddenly felt as if the dress I had on was no longer covering as much skin as it should be. I simply turned away from the man without saying anything back to him and tried to focus on what I wanted to buy. The man didn't seem to get the hint. When I began to walk away, he followed me, this time asking what my name was and how old I was. I didn't answer and did my best to act like I didn't hear him. He was standing very close to me, and when he reached out a hand to tuck a free strand of my hair behind my ears, I felt absolutely livid. I told him I wasn't interested in continuing in conversation with him and that I wanted to be left alone. He laughed at my reaction, but eventually walked away. I was relieved and thought that I had finally gotten rid of the creeper. I grabbed my last item and walked up to the register to pay. After checking out, I walked out the automatic doors to head back to my car and pump the gas I had prepaid for. But shockingly, there was a white van blocking my path to the car. All 4 doors were open, and the man with the cowboy hat was standing right outside. I sprinted past him to my car and locked the doors just before he was able to catch up with me. I ended up driving straight home and reached the driveway just as I ran out of gas. My parents and I called the police, and they caught up with the man later that night. It turns out that he was wanted for a possible connection to a kidnapping in a nearby county. I grew up in a safe community where crime rarely occurred. My parents didn't worry much about anything bad happening to me in our area, so as long as I stayed in the neighborhood, I could ride my bike alone as much as I wanted. Their only request was that I got home before the streetlights went out. I always did as I was told, and there was never a problem. That was until one scary night in October. One of my friends' families was throwing a bonfire party in honor of Halloween, which was only a few days away. Anyone who wanted to come was invited, and it was expected to be a super fun event. The actual bonfire wasn't going to start until it was dark out, so I told my parents, and they told me it was fine if I came home that night. They knew my friend's parents really well and trusted that I would be completely safe. The party turned out to be so much fun. The adults were enjoying drinks while us younger folks were roasting marshmallows and making s'mores. We were all having such a good time that I was surprised to look down at my watch and notice that it was nearing midnight. I knew my parents would be waiting for me, so I decided it was time for me to be heading home. I said goodbye to everyone before hopping on my bike and speeding off towards home. I had only been on the bike for a few minutes when I heard a strange noise and my bike come to a sudden halt. I checked out my tire and realized it was completely flat. I was trying to decide what to do when all of a sudden I heard a voice that felt as if it came from nowhere. I looked up and saw an older man standing right next to me, a creepy grin on his face. He held a tire inflator in one hand and offered to help me out. I absolutely cherished my bike and felt terrible about leaving it behind, but there was something off about the man that made me not want to accept his help. Just as I was trying to decide what to do, the man reached out with his free hand and grabbed me, holding me tight from behind the neck. I frantically began kicking and screaming, just barely freeing myself from his grasp. I then took off running towards home on foot. I glanced back, but the man wasn't following me. After getting home, I told my parents what had happened, and they called 911. Unfortunately, they are still searching for the man. I never felt comfortable riding my bike alone in the neighborhood again after that. Can you imagine ever being in these terrible situations? What would you do? Drop a comment, like, and subscribe, and stay safe.